My name is Larry Bennett, and at 34 years old I thought I knew what family loyalty meant. I spent my entire adult life putting my parents first, staying close to home, helping with their finances, and being there through my father's final battle with cancer. My older brother Richard moved across the country years ago, barely visiting twice a year. Yet somehow at the reading of my father's will, I discovered I'd been left with nothing but fishing gear, while Richard inherited everything. Before I tell you how my entire family betrayed me, let me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family. I grew up in a modest, split-level home in Fairfield, Connecticut, with the kind of normal middle-class upbringing that never suggests the heartbreak waiting decades later. My father Thomas was a contractor who built his business from scratch, working 60-hour weeks to give us a comfortable life. He was a quiet, hard-working man who expressed love through provision rather than words. My mother Diane taught English at the local high school, bringing home stacks of papers to grade every weekend. Between them, they instilled values of hard work, responsibility, and family loyalty that shaped my entire identity. Richard was 5 years older than me, and from my earliest memories he was the golden child. He inherited Dad's height, and Mom's sharp intellect, excelling in both academics and sports. Everything seemed to come easily to him. Perfect SAT scores, basketball team captain, student body president. Meanwhile, I was the average kid. Decent grades, few close friends, and a quiet passion for drawing buildings that nobody except Mom seemed to notice. Our family wasn't wealthy, but we were comfortable until the recession hit in 2008. Dad's contracting business nearly collapsed when several major clients couldn't pay their bills. Overnight, our family went from planning summer vacations to counting pennies at the grocery store. I was 20 at the time, halfway through college at the state university. I'd turned down a scholarship to Cornell to stay closer to home, a decision that Richard had called throwing away my future before he moved to California for his tech industry job. During those tough years, I made choices that would define the next decade of my life. I switched my major from architecture to accounting, knowing it would lead to steadier employment. Every weekend, I drove the 40 minutes home to help Dad with bookkeeping for his struggling business. I spent summers working construction with him instead of taking internships that might have advanced my career. Mom would pack us sandwiches and join us for lunch, always saying how grateful she was that I stayed close to home. After graduation, I took a job at a local accounting firm and bought a small fixer-upper just 20 minutes from my parents' house. Every Sunday, without fail, I joined them for dinner. When their roof started leaking, I helped Dad replace it. When the kitchen appliances died, I researched the best deals and drove Mom to shop for new ones. When their property taxes increased, I quietly set up a monthly transfer from my account to theirs to ease the burden. All the while, Richard built his life 3,000 miles away in San Francisco. His visits became increasingly rare, Christmas every other year, maybe a weekend in the summer if he was attending a conference on the East Coast. His calls were brief and infrequent. When he did visit, he'd arrive with expensive gifts and stories of startup success, venture capital meetings, and luxury vacations. Mom would beam with pride, saving his postcards and displaying the souvenirs he brought from foreign countries. "Your brother works so hard," she would say. "He's under so much pressure out there competing with all those brilliant people." I never pointed out that I worked 60-hour weeks too, or that I'd canceled my modest vacation plans 3 years in a row to help them with various emergencies. It seemed petty to mention these things, and besides, I believed family took care of family. Period. When Richard's marriage to his wife Amanda fell apart after 8 years, Mom spent weeks worried sick about him. They'd only met Amanda twice, at the wedding and one Christmas visit, but Mom talked about the divorce as if it had happened to her own child, which of course it had, just not the child who sat across from her at Sunday dinners week after week, year after year. "He sounds so broken," Larry, Mom confided. "I wish we could do more to help him through this difficult time." I suggested Richard might visit for an extended stay, perhaps work remotely from Connecticut for a while to be closer to family support. Mom immediately dismissed the idea. "Oh no, he can't leave his position. They're in the middle of an important product launch. Besides, he'd be bored to death here, after the excitement of California. I swallowed my response, which would have noted that I had managed to build a fulfilling life in Connecticut despite its supposed lack of excitement. Instead, I nodded and changed the subject. When Dad turned 65, he talked about selling the business and retiring, but he never quite pulled the trigger. Just one more year, he'd say each birthday. Still have a few good projects in me. I suspected the real reason was that he and Mom had dipped heavily into their retirement savings during the recession and never fully recovered. I offered to help them create a financial plan, but Dad waved off my concerns. "We're fine, son," he insisted. "You worry too much about us. Focus on your own future." Little did I know that his resistance wasn't pride, but secrecy. There were financial movements. I wasn't privy to decisions made in hushed phone calls with Richard arrangements that would only come to light after it was too late for me to do anything about them. The foundation of betrayal was being laid brick by brick, year by year, even as I continued to build my life around being the dependable son, the one who was always there, the one who put family first. Richard was writing his success story in California, and I was helping my aging parents navigate their retirement years in Connecticut. Two brothers, two very different paths, neither of us knowing how dramatically they would collide. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly tax filings when Mom's number flashed on my phone. Her voice sounded strained, higher pitched than normal. "Larry, honey, can you come to St. Vincent's Hospital, Dad? Dad collapsed at the hardware store. They've done some scans." The pause stretched too long. They found something. That something turned out to be stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had already spread to his liver. The prognosis was 6 months at best. I sat in the sterile consultation room, while the oncologist explained treatment options in gentle tones, watching my father's face harden into a mask I'd never seen before. Mom clutched his hand, so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I should call Richard," she whispered, as soon as the doctor left. Dad nodded silently, staring at the generic landscape painting on the wall, as if it held the answers to questions he hadn't even formulated yet. Richard flew in, 4 days later, by which time I'd already taken family medical leave from work, researched every experimental treatment available, and set up a detailed calendar of Dad's appointments. Richard stayed for exactly 48 hours, enough time to shed appropriate tears, promise he'd be back soon, and fly back to California for what he described as a critical product launch that could make or break the Caluvries company. I didn't have the luxury of critical product launches. Instead, I had the reality of driving Dad to chemotherapy sessions where he vomited until there was nothing left but bile. I had the paperwork nightmare of insurance claims and medical bills. I had the late-night pharmacy runs for anti-nausea medication, and the early morning scrambles when Dad's fever spiked dangerously high. Richard called today. Mom would announce periodically, her face brightening momentarily. He's trying to arrange his schedule to visit next month. Next month became the month after, which became before Christmas for sure. The promised visits rarely materialized. There were always reasons. Urgent work situations, travel complications, a minor health issue of his own that made flying inadvisable. "He's sending money to help, though," Mom assured me one evening as I installed handrails in the bathroom to help Dad maintain his independence as long as possible. "He feels terrible he can't be here more." I nodded, focusing on leveling the metal bar. I didn't ask how much Richard was sending or where exactly this money was going. I assumed it was helping with medical expenses, though I was handling most of the bills myself. I didn't know then that those transfers from Richard had a very different purpose than supporting our dying father. By month 4, Dad could no longer manage the stairs in their 2-story home. I spent a weekend converting the family room into a bedroom, moving furniture, installing a hospital bed, and setting up monitoring equipment. Mom hovered anxiously, offering coffee and sandwiches, but otherwise seeming lost in her own home. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Larry," she said as I finished mounting a television where Dad could easily see it from bed. "It's what family does," I replied automatically, the mantra I'd lived by for years. Richard made his second visit when Dad had about 2 months left. He stayed for 3 days this time, sitting beside the hospital bed and reminiscing about childhood fishing trips and baseball games. Dad seemed to rally in his presence, summoning energy from some hidden reserve to engage with his firstborn son. I watched from the doorway as they laughed over old stories, feeling simultaneously grateful for Dad's momentary happiness and excluded from this special father-son bond. On the morning Richard was set to leave, I drove him to the airport, while Mom stayed with Dad. "You're doing an amazing job, little brother," Richard said, as I pulled up to the departures curb. "I wish I could be here more, but work. I know I finished for him. Not just work. It's complicated." He sighed, running a hand through his expensively cut hair. "Let's grab a drink next time I'm in town. There are some things we should discuss." But that drink never happened. Dad declined rapidly after Richard's departure, as if he'd spent the last of his strength on that visit. I moved temporarily into my parents' house, sleeping on an air mattress next to Dad's hospital bed, waking at the slightest sound to adjust his oxygen or administer pain medication. Mom became increasingly dependent on me forgetting to eat, unless I prepared meals, neglecting to pay bills, unless I reminded her. She spent hours sitting beside Dad holding his hand, even when he was too sedated to recognize her presence. At night, I'd hear her crying quietly in their bedroom, but during the day, she maintained a bright facade that must have cost her immeasurable energy. In Dad's final week, during a rare moment of clarity between pain medication doses, he called me to his bedside. "Larry," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "You've always been the strong one, the dependable one." I held his hand, alarmed at how light it felt, how prominent the bones had become under paper-thin skin. "I'm counting on you to take care of your mother," he continued. "She's going to need you." "Of course, Dad. I'll always be here for both of you." He nodded, his eyes drifting to the window where autumn leaves were just beginning to turn. "Richard is different, always has been. He needs different things." I waited for him to elaborate, but he drifted back to sleep, his breathing shallow and irregular. We never finished that conversation. He slipped into a coma the next day and passed away peacefully 3 days later, with Mom and me at his bedside. Richard arrived the day before the funeral, bringing a eulogy written on the plane. Mom immediately deferred to him on final arrangements, despite the fact that I had already handled most of the preparations. I bit back my frustration and focused on supporting them both through the service. The funeral was well attended, a testament to Dad's standing in the community. His construction crews came in work boots and flannel shirts, hats held respectfully at their sides. Mom's colleagues from the school brought food and offers of support. Through it all, Richard stood tall beside Mom, accepting condolences with a dignified grief that looked appropriate and felt performative. I stood on Mom's other side, physically supporting her when she swayed with exhaustion, making sure she ate at the reception, thanking people for coming. After everyone left, I cleaned up while Richard and Mom sat in the kitchen, talking in low voices that hushed when I entered the room. I attributed the secrecy to grief, to emotional exhaustion, to the strange intimacy that death creates among survivors. I couldn't have imagined they were discussing financial arrangements that would soon shatter my understanding of my place in the family. Mr. Grayson called, Mom said the following week, as I helped her sort through Dad's clothes for donation. "The family lawyer," she added unnecessarily. "He wants us to come in next Tuesday for the reading of the will." "Okay," I nodded. "I'll pick you up. Is Richard flying back for it?" "He's actually staying through then," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "He's working remotely this week." That struck me as odd. Richard had never been able to stay more than a few days for any family matter before. But I was too drained to question it. I continued folding Dad's flannel shirts, breathing in the fading scent of his aftershave, and preparing myself for the administrative tasks of death that still lay ahead. I had no idea I was walking into a betrayal that would redefine everything I thought I knew about my family. The offices of Grayson and Associates occupied the third floor of a colonial-style building in downtown Fairfield. I'd been there twice before. Once when my parents updated their wills after my grandfather died, and once when Dad needed legal advice about a construction contract dispute. The waiting area hadn't changed: leather chairs, nautical paintings, and magazines that no one actually read. When I arrived, Mom and Richard were already seated in the conference room with Mr. Grayson. Something about their postures, the way they leaned slightly away from the empty chair, clearly left for me. The way their conversation stopped abruptly when I entered sent a chill of premonition down my spine. "Larry, good to see you, Mr. Grayson," said, extending his hand. He was in his 60s with silver hair and the practiced, neutral expression of someone who had delivered both good and terrible news over decades of practice. "Please have a seat." I sat, noticing that Richard wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom reached over and patted my hand briefly before withdrawing. "As you know, we're here to review the terms of your father's last will and testament." Mr. Grayson began, opening a leather portfolio. "Thomas was very clear about his wishes, and I want to assure you that we went over everything in detail before he signed the final documents 3 months ago. 3 months ago. Dad had been sick, but still lucid then. Still able to make decisions. Still able to be influenced. I'll summarize the main provisions before we get into specifics," Mr. Grayson continued. "The will designates Richard as the sole beneficiary of all major assets, including the family home, Thomas's business interests, investment accounts, and insurance policies." The words hit me like physical blows. Sole beneficiary. All major assets. My mind scrambled to make sense of what I was hearing. "There must be some mistake," I said, looking from Mr. Grayson to Mom to Richard. "Dad wouldn't. He couldn't have." Mr. Grayson's expression remained professionally sympathetic. "There's no mistake, Larry. Your father was very specific." He turned a page. "The will does provide for you to receive certain personal effects: his fishing equipment, his book collection, and some personal mementos listed in an attached inventory. Fishing equipment, books, the consolation prizes of an afterthought. The will includes this explanation." Mr. Grayson continued, adjusting his reading glasses. "As Larry has already received significant financial support during my lifetime, it is my wish that the remainder of my estate go to Richard, who may have greater need of it in the future." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Significant financial support. When, where, how? I had been the one helping them financially for years, not the other way around. "What financial support?" I finally managed to ask. "I never received any money from Dad. If anything, I've been helping them make ends meet." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Richard studied his hands. Mom looked out the window. "Mom," I prompted, "what is he talking about?" She turned to me, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Your father and I helped Richard through some difficult times after his divorce," she said. "We felt it was only fair that you receive your share while we were alive, and Richard receive his after your father passed." My share. What share? I never received any inheritance. "The college fund," Richard interjected. "The down payment for your house. The business contacts Dad gave you that helped your career. You've been benefiting for years while I've been on my own across the country." I stared at him incredulously. "The college fund was $12,000, Richard. My house down payment was my own savings from working through college and living with roommates for 5 years after. And what business contacts? I found my own job at the accounting firm." "Thomas did connect you with Anthony at Berger Accounting," Mom said quietly. "For an interview. An entry-level position that paid $35,000 a year. That's hardly an inheritance. Your brother needed help after his divorce." Mom continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Amanda took nearly everything in the settlement. The business he invested in failed. He had gambling debts we didn't know about, until collectors started calling. The revelations kept coming, each one more stunning than the last. Richard, successful golden child Richard, had been failing while projecting success, and my parents had been bailing him out secretly, while I believed our Sunday dinner conversations about his thriving career. "The mortgage," I said, as realization dawned. You've been paying his mortgage in California. Mom nodded reluctantly. And some other expenses. He needed a fresh start. So fresh that he gets everything. The house you've lived in for 30 years. Dad's business that employed 15 people. All of it. I needed it more than you, Richard, said finally, looking me in the eye. You're established. You have a secure job, a house, no debts. I'm still rebuilding. Rebuilding what? Your gambling habit. I turned to Mr. Grayson. This can't be legal. They manipulated my father when he was ill. The lawyer's expression remained carefully neutral. I understand this is upsetting, but your father was of sound mind when he signed these documents. He understood exactly what he was doing. The will is legally binding and would be very difficult to contest successfully, especially with the explicit language about prior support. Prior support that never happened, I insisted. That's not for me to determine, Mr. Grayson replied. I'm simply executing your father's documented wishes. I turned back to Mom, who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. How long has this been going on? The payments to Richard. A few years, she admitted. Since his divorce. He was in a very bad place, Larry. We were worried about him. While I was driving Dad to chemotherapy and installing handrails and sleeping on an air mattress to care for him, you were both planning to leave me nothing. The betrayal felt physical, a weight pressing on my chest until I could barely breathe. Did you ever intend to tell me, or were you just going to let me walk into this ambush? It wasn't an ambush, Richard protested. We just didn't know how to explain it. When exactly did Dad change his will? I asked Mr. Grayson directly. The current will was signed 3 months ago, replacing the previous version from 5 years earlier. And what did the previous version specify? Mr. Grayson glanced at Mom, who nodded slightly. The previous will divided all assets equally between you and your brother, with your mother retaining lifetime rights to the family home. The confirmation was somehow worse than the surprise. There had been a fair will, a normal will that recognized both sons equally, and they had changed it while Dad was dying. I stood up, unable to remain in that room another minute. I need some air. Larry, please. Mom reached for my arm. Try to understand. Your brother. Don't. I cut her off. Just don't. I walked out of the conference room past the receptionist's concerned glance, down 3 flights of stairs because I couldn't stand still long enough to wait for the elevator. Outside, I gulped the autumn air, leaning against the building's brick exterior to steady myself. Everything I thought I knew about my family had just been revealed as fiction. The brother I thought was successful had been secretly failing. The parents I thought valued my sacrifices had been enabling his irresponsibility. The inheritance I assumed would be divided fairly had been redirected entirely behind my back. And I had spent the last 6 months caring for a father who in his final act had chosen to write me out of his legacy, as if my years of support meant nothing at all. I drove home in a fog muscle memory, navigating turns while my mind replayed every family interaction from the past decade, searching for signs I'd missed. Had there been clues in Mom's defensive posture when I questioned Richard's infrequent visits, in Dad's vague references to supporting both my sons in different ways, in the hushed phone calls that ended when I entered the room? My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from Mom, then Richard. I silenced it without reading their messages. What could they possibly say to justify what they'd done? At home, I poured a glass of bourbon and sat on my back deck, watching the sun set behind my neighbor's maple tree. The modest house I'd scraped together a down payment for through years of sacrifice and saving suddenly felt like a consolation prize compared to the family home Richard would now own free and clear. For 3 days, I called in sick to work and barely left my bedroom. Friends checked in concerned about my extended absence after returning from family leave, but I deflected with vague references to post-funeral arrangements. How could I possibly explain that my entire family had betrayed me in the most fundamental way? On the 4th day, I woke with a strange clarity. The numbness had receded, replaced by a cold determination to understand exactly what had happened. I hadn't imagined the financial struggles my parents faced during the recession. I hadn't imagined the careful budgeting at the grocery store or the deferred maintenance on the house. If they had been sending money to Richard all these years, where had it come from? I opened my laptop and logged into the joint checking account I shared with my parents. Dad had added me as an authorized user years ago so I could help with their finances if necessary. I'd used it only to deposit money, never to withdraw, considering it an emergency backup system more than an active account. What I found stunned me all over again. Regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize, $2,000 monthly for the past 4 years. Large lump sums scattered throughout $15,000, with the memo "R legal fees," $27,000 labeled simply "R emergency." The total over 4 years exceeded $300,000, far more than my parents should have been able to afford on Dad's contracting income and Mom's teacher's pension. I dug deeper, reviewing years of statements. They had taken a second mortgage on the house 3 years ago, a house that had been fully paid off for over a decade. They had cashed in certificates of deposit, early paying penalties. Dad had sold equipment from his business equipment he would have needed for ongoing projects. And then I found it. Withdrawals from Mom's retirement account. Early withdrawals with substantial tax penalties. She had cannibalized her financial future to support Richard's present. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. All those times I'd offered to help them with financial planning. All those gentle suggestions about meeting with a retirement advisor. They had brushed me off not out of pride, but because they couldn't let me see what they were doing. I remembered a conversation from 2 years ago, sitting at their kitchen table, while Dad complained about property tax increases. "Maybe it's time to consider downsizing," I'd suggested. "This place is a lot of house for just the two of you." "We could never sell," Mom had replied quickly. "This is our family home. Where would we host Christmas? Where would you and Richard stay when you visit?" Richard, who visited once every 18 months at best. Richard, who was apparently receiving the equivalent of a salary from our parents, while I worried about their heating bills in winter. I clicked through to Dad's business email account, which I'd helped manage during his illness. There, in a folder labeled Family, I found years of correspondence between Dad and Richard. Reading them felt invasive, but I needed answers. The emails told a story of manipulation so calculated it made me nauseous. Richard's desperate pleas for loans to cover gambling debts disguised as business investments. His promises to pay back money that was never returned. His sob stories about Amanda taking everything in the divorce when, according to California court records, I later searched, the settlement had been entirely standard. Most damning was an email from just 4 months ago, when Dad's health had begun to deteriorate rapidly. "Dad, I know this is a difficult time, but I'm concerned about the future. With my current financial situation, I won't be able to maintain my home if something happens to you. I've been thinking about the will we discussed, and I really believe the cleanest solution is to transfer everything to me. Larry is doing well with his career and house. He doesn't need the inheritance the way I do. Besides, you've already helped him so much over the years." The email continued with references to our agreement and what you promised when I moved to California. There was a calculation to Richard's timing, approaching our dying father when he was most vulnerable, most concerned about family harmony after he was gone. Dad's reply was brief. "Your mother and I will speak with Mr. Grayson next week. Don't worry, son. We'll make sure you're taken care of." I sat back, physically ill from what I'd discovered. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a hasty decision made under duress. This was a years-long campaign by Richard to secure the entire inheritance, coupled with my parents' inexplicable willingness to enable his manipulation. Worst of all was the evidence I found of Richard's actual lifestyle during the years he claimed financial hardship. Social media posts showed luxury vacations in Bali and Switzerland, photos of his renovated condo with bay views and high-end furnishings, check-ins at Michelin-starred restaurants. All while my parents remortgaged their paid-off home. All while I drove Dad's 15-year-old pickup truck because he couldn't afford a newer vehicle. All while I worried about them having enough saved for retirement. The final piece came when I found an email thread discussing the changes to the will. Richard had suggested, and Dad had agreed, that the line about me already receiving significant financial support be added specifically to make it harder for me to contest the will later. They had anticipated my shock. They had prepared for my objections. They had deliberately crafted language to undermine any legal challenge I might bring. This wasn't just opportunism. This was premeditated betrayal. A week after the will reading, I finally answered one of Mom's calls. Her voice was tentative, conciliatory. "Larry, please come for dinner tonight. We need to talk about everything." I agreed not because I was ready to forgive, but because I needed to confront them with what I'd learned. I arrived at 6 to find Mom cooking my favorite meal, pot roast with roasted potatoes, an obvious attempt to soften the conversation ahead. "Richard's here too," she said as I entered the kitchen. "In the living room." Of course he was. The new owner of the house making himself at home. He stood when I entered, extending a hand I deliberately ignored. "Larry, I'm glad you came. We should clear the air." "Clear the air," I repeated flatly. "Is that what we're doing? Not explaining how you manipulated our dying father, or justifying stealing my inheritance." "Nobody stole anything." Mom interjected, wiping her hands on her apron. "Please, let's sit down and talk calmly." "I've seen the bank statements," I said, remaining standing. "The emails, the second mortgage, your retirement withdrawals. I know everything." Mom's face drained of color. Richard's expression hardened. "You had no right to go through private correspondence," he said. "You had no right to drain our parents dry while pretending to be successful," I countered. $300,000, Richard. Where did it all go? Because it certainly wasn't to rebuild your life after the divorce. Not while you were posting photos from 5-star resorts. "It's more complicated than that," he began. "It's really not," I cut him off. "You gambled away your money, then convinced our parents to bail you out by mortgaging their future. You deliberately timed the will change when Dad was at his weakest. Your brother needed help," Mom said, her voice stronger, now defensive. "Your father and I made these decisions together. We always believed you were the stronger one, Larry. You could succeed on your own. Richard needed more support. So, my reward for being responsible is nothing, while his reward for being irresponsible is everything." "We knew you would be okay," she insisted. "You've always been okay. Because I worked for it. Because I sacrificed for it. Because I stayed here and helped you both," while he sent occasional checks that apparently didn't even come from his own money. Richard stood straighter, his jaw tightening. "I'm selling the business," he announced. "I already have a buyer interested. The equipment is outdated, but the client list and contracts have value." The business Dad had built from nothing. The business that employed 15 people who had attended his funeral, people whose livelihoods now hung in Richard's careless hands. "And the house?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "It's too big for Mom alone," Richard said smoothly. "We're looking at condos in Stamford. The market is strong right now for sellers." Mom twisted her hands in her apron. "It makes sense financially. This place has so many stairs, and the maintenance." "The maintenance I've been handling for years," I finished. "The repairs I've been making. The yard I've been mowing." "We know you've been helpful," Richard said with condescending patience. "No one's disputing that." "Helpful?" I laughed bitterly. "I rebuilt the deck last summer. I replaced the water heater when it flooded the basement. I drove Dad to every single chemotherapy appointment." "And we appreciate that," Mom said quickly. "We thought, well, we hoped you might continue helping with some of those things. The buyer Richard is talking to might keep the house as a rental property, and they'd need someone local to call for emergencies." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You want me to keep maintaining a house that you cut me out of, to be on call for your buyer's emergencies?" "It would just be until things settle," Richard said. "We'd compensate you, of course. Like you compensated Dad's employees. the ones you're putting out of work by selling to the highest bidder. Richard's face flushed. The business isn't profitable enough to keep operating as is. Dad was too sentimental about keeping people on when the numbers didn't justify it. Those people worked for him for decades. They came to his funeral in work boots because they respected him so much they didn't own dress shoes. This is business, not charity, Richard snapped. And, speaking of money, you need to understand something. The financial situation is tight. Mom's continuing expenses, which you're responsible for now, I interrupted, as the sole inheritor. It's not that simple, he said, exchanging a glance with Mom. There are debts, tax implications. Mom's pension alone won't cover everything. And there it was, the real reason for this dinner. They hadn't invited me to apologize or explain. They'd invited me to ensure I would continue providing the support I'd always given, even after being disinherited. I looked at Mom, really looked at her, seeing not just my mother, but a woman who had enabled one son's irresponsibility at the expense of the other's loyalty, who had participated in a betrayal so fundamental it couldn't be explained away by grief or manipulation. Mom, I have one question, I said quietly. Did you agree with changing the will? Did you think it was fair? She wouldn't meet my eyes. Your father thought it was for the best. That's not what I asked. Did you think it was fair to leave me nothing after everything I've done for this family? A long silence stretched between us. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Life isn't always fair, Larry, she finally said. Sometimes we have to make hard choices for the greater good of the family. The family, I repeated. You mean Richard? I mean all of us, she insisted. Richard needs this inheritance more than you do. He always has. Even as children, he needed more attention, more support. You were always so capable. I felt something break inside me, the last thread of hope that there had been some misunderstanding, some explanation that would make sense of this betrayal. But there wasn't. My mother had participated willingly in writing me out of the family legacy because I had committed the sin of being self-sufficient. I'm done, I said quietly. I'm done being punished for doing the right thing, while he's rewarded for doing the wrong thing. Don't be dramatic, Richard scoffed. No one's punishing you. Really? What would you call being excluded from an inheritance? Specifically, because I didn't take enough from our parents during their lifetime. What would you call being asked to continue providing free labor for property I no longer have any stake in? We're just asking for a transition period, Mom said, until things settle. Things are settled, I replied. Dad's will made that clear. Richard gets everything, which means Richard is responsible for everything. The house, the business, your financial support. It's all his now. I turned to leave, but Richard stepped forward, grabbing my arm. You're being selfish, he said, voice rising. After everything they've done for you, let go of me. My voice was deadly quiet. I have never in my adult life taken a dime from them that I didn't repay tenfold in time, labor, and actual cash transfers. I've been paying half their property tax for 5 years. I've been subsidizing their grocery bills. I've been maintaining a house I'll never inherit. Larry, please, Mom began. No, I'm done. I pulled my arm from Richard's grasp. You've made your choice, very clear. Now, you get to live with it. As I walked to the door, I heard Richard call after me. Don't think you can contest the will. We had Dad declare you'd already received your share. I paused at the threshold, turning back one last time. Keep the inheritance, Richard. It's clearly what matters to you. But understand something. You inherited the responsibility, along with the assets. All of it. The door closed behind me with a finality that felt like the end of a chapter of my life. In my car, I sat for long minutes watching the lights in the kitchen where Mom was probably consoling Richard about my overreaction. That night, I called an attorney. Not Mr. Grayson, but Ann Winters, a partner at a firm across town who specialized in estate disputes. She listened to my story without interruption, then sighed deeply. I won't sugarcoat this, Larry. The will is legally sound, especially with that specific language about prior support. Even though it's not true, it creates enough ambiguity to make litigation lengthy and expensive, with uncertain outcome. So there's nothing I can do about the will. Probably not unless you have evidence of actual dementia or coercion, which sounds unlikely given your father was still making business decisions. But about protecting yourself going forward, absolutely. She outlined a strategy not for fighting the past, but for securing my future. A clean, complete separation from the financial entanglements I'd allowed to develop over years of trying to help. Your brother and mother made a choice, Anne said bluntly. They don't get to have it both ways. Cutting you out of the inheritance while expecting your continued support. As I drove home from her office, a strange sense of lightness began to replace the anger. Not forgiveness, I was nowhere near that, but clarity. For the first time in my adult life, I was free to prioritize myself without guilt, to build a life based on my own dreams rather than others' needs. It was time to make some long overdue changes. The next morning I called into work and requested another personal day. With Ann Winter's advice fresh in my mind, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad creating an inventory of every financial connection I still had with my family. The list was longer than I expected. Joint checking account with parents primarily for deposits, authorized user on mom's credit card for emergencies, automatic monthly transfers to their household account, guaranteed cosigner on their home equity line of credit, automatic payments set up from my account for their utilities, informal agreement to cover half their property taxes, several tools and equipment stored in their garage, my name on various service contracts for house maintenance. For years I'd been operating as a silent partner in my parents' finances, stepping in to fill gaps and ensure stability. All while Richard received direct cash infusions with no expectation of reciprocity. I began systematically severing each connection. First, I visited my bank and removed myself from the joint checking account after transferring my portion of the funds to my personal account. The banker's expression was neutral but curious. As I explained, I needed complete financial separation from family accounts. "Would you like to leave a note for the other account holders?" she asked. "No, thank you. They'll figure it out." Next, I called the credit card company and removed myself as an authorized user on mom's card. I canceled the automatic monthly transfers I'd set up to their household account. I contacted the bank, holding their home equity line, and formally withdrew as a cosigner, a process that required notarized documents and triggered a notification to the primary borrowers. One by one, I untangled the financial web I'd allowed to develop. Each action felt both painful and liberating. Acknowledgement of a relationship fundamentally changed, but also reclamation of resources I'd diverted from my own needs for too long. The utility companies were the most time-consuming. Over the years, I'd set up automatic payments for their electricity, water, internet, and home security system, all drawing directly from my checking account. Each required separate calls, verification of identity and confirmation that yes, I wanted to cancel these payments immediately. The next billing cycle starts in 3 days, the electric company representative informed me. The account holders will need to establish their own payment method before then to avoid interruption of service. "I understand," I replied. "Please make a note in the account that I should no longer be contacted regarding this service." I drafted formal letters documenting each financial separation, sending them by certified mail to create a paper trail. Anne had warned me that emotional family dynamics often led to selective memory about financial arrangements, and I needed protection against future claims that I'd abandoned responsibilities without notice. The most difficult task was retrieving my personal property from my parents' house. I waited until a weekday when I knew Richard would be on a conference call. His schedule predictably posted on his business social media, and Mom would be at her book club. Using the key I still had, I quickly collected my tools from the garage, childhood mementos from the attic, and the few pieces of furniture I'd stored in their basement when I downsized apartments years ago. I left my key on the kitchen counter with a brief note. Collected my belongings. Please direct any future maintenance needs to Richard, as the property owner. As I pulled away from the house I'd helped maintain for over a decade, I felt a complex mixture of grief and resolution. This wasn't how I'd imagined my relationship with my family evolving. But I couldn't continue pouring resources into a relationship that had been revealed as fundamentally unequal. With the practical matters handled, I turned my attention to rebuilding my life around my own priorities rather than my family's needs. The architecture dreams I'd abandoned after college still lingered at the edges of my consciousness. On impulse, I called Jason, a college friend who now ran his own architectural firm in Hartford. "Larry Bennett, as I live and breathe," he answered warmly. "It's been, 2 years since we grabbed that beer." At least I admitted. Life got complicated. Family stuff. "I heard about your dad. I'm really sorry." "Thanks. Listen, I'm making some career changes and wondered if I could pick your brain about the current state of architectural certification. I never finished those courses we started together." Jason's enthusiasm was immediate and genuine. "Are you finally pursuing that? Man, your designs were always the best in our class. Come by the office tomorrow. I might have some ideas that would interest you." Those ideas turned into a part-time position at his firm, while I completed the certification courses I'd abandoned years ago. The work was challenging in the best possible way, engaging parts of my brain that accounting had never touched. For the first time in years, I found myself sketching building concepts in my free time, remembering the passion that had originally drawn me to the field. I also found unexpected support in a weekly group for adult children navigating family estrangement. The first meeting felt awkward, admitting to strangers that my family had effectively discarded me. But the relief of speaking with people who truly understood was profound. No platitudes about blood being thicker than water. No pressure to reconcile for reconciliation's sake. Just honest acknowledgement that sometimes families inflict the deepest wounds. Therapy helped too. Dr. Martinez listened without judgment as I unpacked decades of family dynamics, helping me recognize patterns I'd been too close to see. The golden child and the reliable one. The enabling parent and the emotional manipulation. The way responsibility had been weaponized against me, while irresponsibility had been rewarded in my brother. "You're grieving multiple losses," she observed in our third session. "Not just your father's death and the inheritance, but the loss of your understanding of your place in the family. The story you thought you were living turned out to be very different from reality." "I keep waiting to stop being angry," I admitted, "to reach some kind of acceptance." "Anger is appropriate when you've been treated unfairly," she replied. "The question is whether you want that anger to define your path forward." I pondered that question as weeks passed without contact from my family. I had expected immediate fallout from my financial separation, panicked calls about unpaid bills or missed mortgage payments, but there was only silence. I wondered if pride kept them from reaching out, or if Richard had actually stepped up to his new responsibilities. Then, exactly 4 weeks after I'd removed myself from their accounts, my phone lit up with a text from Mom. "Mortgage is due." Called the bank and they said, "You removed yourself as co-signer. Need your help." No greeting, no acknowledgement of the situation. Just the expectation that I would step in, as I always had inheritance, or no inheritance. I stared at the message for a long time, remembering all the Sunday dinners, all the maintenance projects, all the quiet transfers of funds. Remembering, too, the betrayal at the lawyer's office, the calculated manipulation, the years of secret financial support to Richard, while I worried about their retirement. My reply was simple. Not mine. I blocked her number immediately afterward, not trusting myself to maintain boundaries if she called crying or pleading. Richard's number I'd blocked weeks earlier after a barrage of accusatory messages about abandoning our mother. The silence that followed was deafening but necessary. I immersed myself in my architectural courses, in building new friendships through a local hiking group, in rediscovering hobbies long abandoned, in the name of family obligation. Slowly, the weight of betrayal began to lessen, not disappearing but transforming, into something I could carry without being crushed. 3 months after cutting contact, I received a letter from Mr. Grayson. I nearly threw it away unopened, assuming it was another attempt to make me resume financial support. Something made me open it anyway. "Dear Larry," it began. "While I cannot discuss details of other clients' affairs, I feel professionally obligated to inform you that the family home has been listed for sale, and your mother will be relocating to Stamford Pines Apartments next month. If you wish to retrieve any remaining personal items, please contact my office to arrange a time when the property will be accessible." So it was happening. The home where I'd grown up, where I'd helped replace the roof and repair the deck and plant the garden, was being sold to fund Richard's next chapter. I felt a pang of grief for the physical connection to my childhood that would soon belong to strangers. But beneath the grief was something unexpected relief. The house had become a symbol of obligation, of unequal expectations of being taken for granted. Its sale represented the final severing of the old patterns. Whatever happened next would unfold without the weight of that history. I didn't contact Mr. Grayson to arrange a visit. There was nothing left in that house that I needed to move forward. 6 months after the will reading that had shattered my understanding of my family, I sat on the patio of my favorite coffee shop, reviewing plans for a small commercial building. My first solo project at Jason's firm. The spring sunshine felt symbolic, somehow warming away the last of winter's chill, just as I was finally emerging from the coldest period of my life. Larry Bennett. I looked up to find Tom Frazier, my father's longtime business partner, standing beside my table holding a coffee cup. "Tom?" "Hey," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. "Please join me." He sat studying me with the direct gaze I remembered from childhood visits to construction sites. "You look good. Better than the last time I saw you." At the funeral, I nodded. Yeah, that was a difficult time. For many reasons, he agreed, a knowing edge to his voice. "I've been trying to reach you for months, but your number changed." "I needed a fresh start," I explained, simply. He nodded, understanding, in his weathered face. "I heard about the will. That whole situation. It wasn't right what happened." I tensed slightly, not wanting to reopen healing wounds. "It's done now." "Not entirely," Tom said, reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing an envelope. "Your father and I had arrangements that weren't part of his official estate. Business matters between partners." He slid the envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $75,000 and a handwritten note in my father's distinctive block printing. "Tom, if you're reading this, things have gone as we discussed. Please ensure Larry receives his share of our side venture after I'm gone. He's too honorable to have asked for it himself, but a father knows his sons. This stays between us. Thomas." I stared at the note, emotions colliding too quickly to name. "I don't understand. What side venture?" Tom smiled slightly. "Your father and I bought distressed properties on the side. Fixed them up, sold them, or rented them out. Nothing fancy, just a small operation separate from the main business. We had an agreement that our shares would transfer outside our estates directly to designated beneficiaries." He never mentioned this to me. He wouldn't have. Tom nodded. Thomas was an old-school man, played things close to the vest, but he made sure certain provisions were in place, without anyone else's knowledge or input. The implication was clear. My father had created this separate arrangement, knowing Richard might someday influence his official will. He'd established a safety net for me that even my brother couldn't touch. "I'm not sure what to say," I admitted, still processing this revelation. "Say you'll use it well," Tom replied simply. "Your father believed in your potential, Larry. He wasn't always good at showing it, but he told me more than once that you were the one with the real vision. He kept the brochures from that architecture program you wanted to attend. Had them in his desk drawer for years." A lump formed in my throat. I always thought he was disappointed I didn't take over the business. "Nah." Tom shook his head. "He respected that you found your own path. He just wasn't much for saying those things out loud." He stood, placing a hand briefly on my shoulder. For what it's worth, I think he'd be proud of where you're headed now." After Tom left, I sat for a long time watching people pass by on the street, the check and note still in my hand. The money itself was significant, but less important than what it represented. Confirmation that my father had seen me, had valued me, had made provision for me in his own complicated way. It didn't erase the hurt of the will reading or justify my mother's complicity in Richard's manipulation, but it offered a more nuanced understanding of my father's perspective, a small counter-narrative to the story of complete rejection I'd been carrying. Over the next few months, life developed a new rhythm. I completed my architectural certification and moved to full-time status at Jason's firm. My first major design won a small regional award validating the creative instincts I'd suppressed for too long. I used part of Tom's check to invest in a better apartment with space for a proper drafting table and put the rest toward the student loans for my new credentials. Through mutual friends, I heard occasional news of my family. Richard had indeed sold the family home using the proceeds to invest in a new tech startup that showed initial promise. Mom had settled into her Stamford apartment and joined a community theater group, something she'd always wanted to try but never had, while married to my practically minded father. I felt no impulse to reconnect, but the sharp pain of betrayal had dulled to a more manageable ache. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that I could acknowledge the complex reality of my family, their failings and limitations alongside the good memories, without reopening the door to the same damaging patterns. Forgiveness doesn't mean restoration of the previous relationship, she reminded me during one of our now monthly check-ins. It means releasing the expectation that the past could have been different. A year after the will reading, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "It's Mom. New phone. Can we meet?" Just to talk. I waited 3 days before replying, using the time to consider what boundaries would be necessary for any contact. We met at a neutral restaurant, halfway between our homes. The woman who walked through the door looked older, smaller somehow, than the mother who had stood in the lawyer's office justifying my disinheritance. Her hair had more gray, and her confident teacher's posture had given way to something more tentative. "Thank you for coming," she said as she sat across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I admitted. She nodded, accepting this honesty. "I owe you an apology. Many apologies, actually." "Yes, you do. When your father got sick, everything happened so fast. Richard was struggling, or we thought he was, and your father was desperate to make sure everyone would be taken care of. We made decisions that seemed logical at the time, but were deeply unfair to you. You chose Richard over me," I said simply. "Not just with the will, but for years before that." She didn't deny it. "We thought he needed us more. You were always so capable, so reliable. We took you for granted in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. And now I'm learning to stand on my own feet. The apartment is small, but it's mine. I've made new friends. Started painting again." She hesitated. Richard. The startup is taking all his attention. He visits when he can." I heard the echo of old patterns in those words. The excuses, the protection of the golden child. But I also heard a new awareness in her tone. "I'm not looking to reestablish the relationship we had before," I said carefully. "That wasn't healthy for any of us. But I'm open to building something new with very clear boundaries." I'd like that she said relief, evident in her voice. "On your terms." We talked for 2 hours, covering safe topics mostly. Her theater group, my architectural work, a cousin's recent wedding. No mention of money, or Richard's business ventures, or the past betrayals. It wasn't reconciliation exactly, but it was a beginning of something different. Something that might eventually develop into a healthier connection. As for Richard, I received an email 6 months later, formal businesslike, informing me that his startup had secured significant funding and asking if I'd consider designing their new headquarters. Previous history aside, "I know talent when I see it," he wrote. This would be a strictly professional arrangement. I declined politely but firmly. Some bridges once burned should stay crossed off the map. The inheritance saga changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I learned that sacrifices should have limits, that constantly setting your own needs aside doesn't earn you love or loyalty, just exploitation. I learned that helping others becomes enabling when it creates dependency rather than growth. I learned to recognize the subtle manipulation of emotional leverage, the implied obligations that keep unhealthy systems functioning. Most importantly, I learned that boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary for authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than expectation and obligation. The money and property never came back to me, nor would I want them to now. What I gained instead was freedom from guilt, from impossible expectations, from the exhausting role of family fixer. I built a new life focused on my long-deferred dreams, surrounding myself with people who value reciprocity and transparency. Sometimes I still feel anger flare when I drive past our old family home, now painted a different color by its new owners. But mostly I feel gratitude for the painful awakening that forced me to prioritize my own path. The inheritance I ultimately received wasn't measured in dollars or property deeds, but in the hard-won wisdom that family relationships should lift you up, not drain you dry. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? Leave a comment below sharing what helped you move forward. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's written in a will, but the strength you find when everything falls apart. Thank you for listening, and may you find the courage to prioritize your own well-being, even when it means walking away from toxic situations.